Well, friends, the subject matter for discussion is with regard to charitable and religious trusts and their assessment. In fact, the chairman also gave a prelude to some of the issues. But then, when I started my practice way back in 1994, I bought a book called Taxation of Charity. In fact, my first presentation ever was on charitable trusts. And I bought a book called Taxation of Charity. And after some time, and after reading it for some time, I realized that there should not be taxation of charity. But unfortunately, there is taxation of charity, and there is a book for it too. And every time I read about charitable trusts, I always remember what I used to listen to from Mr. Palkiwala when I was a student of Chartered Accountants. Mr. Palkiwala used to complete the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, the Southern India Regional Council, and address people here at Chennai on the finance bill just after the budget. It used to be amazing to listen to a speaker like Mr. Palkiwala. And some of the things that stood in my mind have stood in my mind until today. And one of the things he used to say was that tax laws in this country are drafted on the foregone premise that every Indian is a crook. This was a statement made by Mr. Palkiwala about 30 years back when I heard him. And I think it is continuing to be true even today. Even today, I think tax laws are made on the premise that every Indian is a crook. In fact, the chairman was also referring to the procedural amendments that have been made. And these procedural amendments are so time-bound that they increase the workload of a charitable trust so much, and also increase the workload of us as professionals in guiding the assessees. In fact, more often than not, it ends up that our workload increases and not the assessee's workload. So there are also a number of procedural amendments that have been made by the Finance Act 2020. The Finance Act 2020 has made sweeping changes in many regards, and one of them is with regard to a charitable or religious trust. So the procedures have also undergone a change. There have been various issues. In fact, many of the issues still remain unaddressed. There have been amendments time and again in relation to charitable trusts. In fact, there has been this attitude. There has been this attitude. Is my audio clear, Chairman? Let me try with.
Network issue continue பண்ணுங்க சார் continue பண்ணுங்க network issue இருக்குன்னு நினைக்கிறேன் continue பண்ணிக்கலாம்
ஒரே நிமிஷம் let me just connect. Just give me a minute, sir.
Please, sir.
Is it better now, sir?
Please, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes. So, yes, sir. We were talking about various aspects. I was talking about the procedural changes. But then the issues that have arisen are not new issues. In fact, most of the issues have already been existing. And many of them have been creating so much of difficulty in completing assessment of a charitable or religious. So what I propose to do is to start with the various provisions and probably go on to the procedural amendment. I'm not starting with the procedural amendment. I will go on to the procedural amendment as we go further. Now, first of all, if you look at section 215 of the Income Tax Act, the definition of the term charitable purpose is found in section 215 of the Income Tax. This itself has undergone a change in the recent past. Earlier, if you will see, charitable purpose only said it includes relief to the poor, education, medical relief, or any other objects of general public utility. It referred to 4 items, namely relief to poor, education, medical relief, or any other object of general public utility.
Later on, they inserted the term yoga. They inserted the term yoga and also inserted preservation of environment and preservation of monuments and places of general public interest or of historic. These were two areas. So effectively, we have now 7 items which are listed out in section 215 to define what will be called a charitable purpose. Now, insofar as a charitable purpose is concerned, they also amended the law to provide that by inserting a proviso to provide that the advancement of any other object of general public utility, the advancement of any other object of general public utility shall not be a charitable purpose if it involves carrying on any activity in the nature of trade, commerce or business, or any activity of rendering any service in relation to trade, commerce or business for a cess or a fee or any other considerable, irrespective of the nature and use or application or retention of income for such activity. And they also provide, unless such activity is undertaken in the course of actual carrying on of such advancement of any other object of general public. And please note the language is and. The aggregate receipts from such activity or activity during the previous year do not exceed 20% of the total receipts to the trust or institution or undertaking such activity or activities in that previous year. So we now have a proviso which can create some kind of a embargo on a particular activity being called a charitable purpose. And how does this embargo work? It basically says if the trust is involved in carrying on any activity in the nature of trade, commerce or business, or any activity of rendering any service in relation to trade, commerce or business, it either renders or it either does a trade, commerce or business or renders a service in relation to a trade, commerce. And that should be for a cess, a fee or any other concern. Then the proviso seeks to create an embargo. Of course, the proviso itself seeks to provide an exception to say that if any activity is carried on in the actual course of carrying on the advancement of the object of general public utility, and the receipts from such activity is not more than 20% of the gross receipt, then the benefit of this, this or rather the proviso will not come into play, and the trust can continue to call itself a charitable trust, which is carrying on a charitable. Now, before we go further, it is interesting to note that the term charitable purpose has 7 items which are listed within it, which I said a little earlier: relief to the poor, education, yoga, medical relief, preservation of environment, or preservation of monuments and places of artistic or historic interest, and advancement of any other object of general purpose. Now, the proviso only says that the advancement of any other object of general public will not be a charitable purpose if a trade, commerce or business is carried on, or a service in relation to a trade, commerce or business is carried on for a cess, a fee or any other. Which means that if a particular charitable trust falls not within the limb of any other object of general public, then it should logically follow that the trust or institution will not be hit by the proviso. In fact, there is a board circular to this effect, circular number 11 of 2008, where the board itself has clarified that the advancement of any other object of general public utility alone will be hit by the proviso to section 215. The others will not be hit or affected by the proviso to 215 at all. So that is one aspect that needs to be borne in mind. In fact, when my biodata was being read out by Balaji, he was referring to the fact that he was referring to the fact that I have argued one case called AVM charity. In fact, that has been one case which has created a lot of, discussion in many fora with regard to what will be affected by an object of general public, a trust which is any other object of general public. As most of you may be aware, this is a trust which runs a Kalyana Mandapam called AVM Rajeshwari Kalyana Mandapam, which is in the heart of the Chennai city and probably one of the more finer Mandapam, Kalyana Mandapam available in this part of the country. Now, what happened was that we have, run a Kalyana Mandapam in the trust, and that Kalyana Mandapam has been earning income regularly. So, the department was of the view that since you are running the Kalyana Mandapam on commercial terms, you are hit by the proviso to section 215. You are hit by the proviso to 215, and therefore you are not entitled to call yourself a trust for charitable purpose. Now, our argument was very simple. Now, apart from the Kalyana Mandapam, what are we doing has to be looked at. I have let out, apart from the Kalyana Mandapam, I have let out a place on rent to a diabetic center. I have let out a place on rent to a diabetic center for a very nominal rent, which is proven to be nominal. I have also let out a school, a large premises, a very large premises somewhere in a place called Virugambakam in Chennai, running to acres, a few acres of land, for running a school for children, which again was let out for a very reasonable or a very low rent. And the education there was also quite cheap. It was let out to another charitable. So we argued, look, what is the object of this trust? The object of this trust is education on the one hand, relief to the poor on the other, and thirdly, medical relief, because we are also running a diabetic. We are only doing medical relief, relief to the poor, and providing education. Therefore, in our submission, we said that this cannot be called a trust which is run for any other objects of general public utility. And since it is not run for any other objects of general public utility, the proviso will not apply. In fact, we also explained, if somebody has the patience, maybe if you read the order, we also explained that if we are able to earn this much money out of AVM Rajeshwari, which is this area of land in a particular place, one can imagine what amount of money we could have earned if we had let out the building which we have otherwise let out to the school. And if that will not be called charity, what else can be called? I don't have to run the school myself. Ultimately, I am promoting education by giving it to another charitable trust which is doing education. I have not given it to a private party. I have given it to another charitable trust which is registered under 12AA and is also enjoying the 80K. The tribunal held in favor of the other. Now, this leads us to a very interesting question, because if you see the proviso would make it clear that advancement of any other object of general public utility will not include or will not be involved as a charitable purpose if it involves carrying on any activity in the nature of trade, commerce, or business, or any activity of rendering any service in relation to a trade, commerce, or business. So now let us assume I am carrying on a general public utility, and the output of the general public utility is also derived. Take a simple example. For example, there is a decided case of the Jaipur bench, where the issue was that the assessee was a trust which was getting income by way of sale of milk, etc. But the object of the trust was to ensure that it was giving shelter to cows which were maimed, which were old cows, stray cows, etc., and were also educating the milkmen. Now, in this process, some milk and milk products came to be sold, and there was also expenses incurred by the charity. and net there was some income which remained. Now the question that arose was, will this fall within any other objects of general public? The Jaipur bench almost bordered around saying that even if it falls under any other objects of general public, since this is just an output that is realized, from the sale of milk, etc., which was inevitable in the course of running the charitable trust or the benefit of Section 215 should not be denied, and the assessee was entitled to exemption under Section. Now, at this stage, we will also notice the proviso, which says that such activity is undertaken in the course of carrying out of such advancement of any other object of general public. So, if it is in the course of carrying out any other object of general public utility, it will not be hit by the proviso. Provided, of course, the gross receipt does not exceed 20%. Now, when can we say that the trust is carrying on an activity which is incidental to the attainment of the objects of the trust? In fact, there is a classic decision of the Supreme Court in 247 ITR 785. I repeat, 247 ITR 785, the Supreme Court, in a case called Sandhi Trust. In Sandhi Trust, the Supreme Court held that so long as the monies that are realized from carrying on the activity which is in the nature of a commercial activity is used for the benefit of the trust, the business is incidental to the attainment of the objects of the trust. This is what was held by the Supreme Court in Sandhi Trust. In fact, you also have another interesting decision of the Uttarakhand High Court reported in 310 ITR 162. I repeat, 310 ITR 162, where the Uttarakhand High Court also expressed a similar view in similar circumstances after referring to the decision of the Supreme Court in Sandhi. So one will realize that in normal circumstances, if a trust is carrying on an activity which is commercial in nature, but if the revenue therefrom is utilized for the purpose of the benefit of the trust, then there will not be any difficulty claiming the exemption under Section 11. But after the insertion of the proviso to Section 215, one may notice that if the trust is classified as any other activity of general public utility, then the proviso may come into play and you may not be entitled to take it. So, to put it in a nutshell, if one falls under any of the other activity clauses, namely relief to the poor, education, yoga, medical relief, etc., then there will be no difficulty in claiming the exemption under 215, even if a business is carried on or an activity is carried on which is commercial in nature, so long as the funds from that business are utilized for the benefit of the trust or the object of the trust. And also remember that one will have to comply with the conditions that are stated in Section 11.4 and 11.4a, namely that the assessee must maintain separate books of account in respect of such business activity. Yes, the assessee must maintain separate books of account in respect of such commercial activity. And any incomes which are not reflected in the book will be regarded as not being for the purpose of charity, which is quite logical. Now, this is so far as the basic sakasana. Incidentally, it makes wonderful reading for one to go through the decision of the Delhi High Court in the case of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India itself. Because the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, the issue was whether it is an educational institution institution or otherwise. Of course, the Delhi High Court held in favor of the institute, but it is very nice reading to go through this aspect. Now, as far as a charitable trust is concerned, one will understand that for claim of exemption, there are various conditions, starting from requiring an audit report to be furnished, requirement to file a return of income, a requirement to, apply a certain portion of income of the trust, the fact that the trust should be registered with the commissioner or the principal commissioner of income tax. Now, incidentally, one important aspect is with regard to application of income. Now, the law provides that 85% of the income, 85% of the income should be applied for charitable and religious purposes in India, in accordance with the object of the public charitable or religious. 85% should be applied for charitable or religious purposes. Is the requirement of law. Now, what is this 85%? Obviously, 85% has to be on the gross receipt. So, if a trust has a gross receipt of 1 crore, it has to apply 85 lakhs for the purpose of, let's say, a charitable institution for the purpose of charity. 85% has to be applied for that purpose. Now, this is one aspect. The other aspect that one may bear in mind is that, just give me a moment, please. The other aspect that one may bear in mind is that if you do not apply 85%, what will be the effect of that? Now, the law also provides for what is called accumulation of it, which we will deal with a little later. But to start with, we are discussing about the requirement to apply 85%, and 85% is of the gross receipt. Now, the law does not use the word spend. It does not use the word that, or it does not require that it should be in the form of revenue expense. The law simply says that one should have applied 85% for the purpose of charitable or religious. So, application does not necessarily mean that the expenditure should be in revenue nature. It can also be in the capital fee. Now, this leads me to one question which was discussed by the chairman even in this opening remarks. What about depreciation? Now, well, as far as depreciation is concerned, the issue has been discussed time and again, and ultimately the Supreme Court took a view that depreciation will be allowed as application. In fact, there was this big debate, the department saying that you are claiming a double deduction, because you are claiming the cost of the asset also as application. You are claiming the depreciation also as an application. That amounts to a double deduction according to the department. Now, incidentally, this was negatived by the Supreme Court, and I would have thought that no other view should be possible in the matter, because this is not a double deduction. Depreciation is a claim made on commercial principles, and application is an independent aspect. In fact, if I can put it differently, if I have 100 rupees in my hand as a charitable, you cannot expect me to spend more than 100 rupees. The law mandates that I must spend 85 rupees. I have spent 85 rupees on capital. Now, I have to at some point in time find the money to replace the capital asset. And for that, I need to provide for what is called a depreciation allowance. As accountants, I'm sure all of us will be very easily able to appreciate that depreciation is a charge on the income and is paid to provide for replenishment or replacement of money when it is required, because there will be wear and tear in the asset. That is why we do not depreciate land, but depreciate only other assets. We do not depreciate. Only where there is a likelihood of wear and tear, we depreciate the asset. So the Supreme Court held that depreciation is allowable. Now, the law has made an amendment thereafter and has provided that depreciation will not be available. The depreciation will not be available And this amendment has come with effect from 1/4/2015. 1/4/2015. Right? Now, what is the amendment? The amendment says if you have claimed the cost of the asset as an application, then depreciation on that asset will not be allowed again as an application. Now, to some extent, we must admit that this amendment made by the Finance Act is retrospective in operation. One may not fully agree with me when I use that term because we have always understood retrospective to mean that it will affect an earlier year. I am not saying that. Let us assume I bought an asset in the financial year 12-13 and I have been claiming depreciation in the financial year 12-13, financial year 13-14 and financial year 14. Now 14-15 will fall within the assessment year 15-16 and the amendment has been made. Therefore, one will have to be very careful to see whether in the year 12-13, financial year 12-13, whether the assessee claimed the cost of the asset as application. If he did, then it will not be open to that trust to claim depreciation in assessment year 15-16 because the amendment is effective from 1/4/2000. So to this extent, even assets which were earlier acquired and claimed as application will disqualify depreciation on the same asset for subsequent years once the amendment has come into force. Now this looks pretty simple because one will understand in theory it is very easy to say you either get the cost of the asset or claim the depreciation as a result. In practice, however, one will also easily be with me when you say, we are all accountants. We all understand accountancy so well. We understand accountancy so well. We understand that it is going to be extremely difficult to identify which asset has been claimed as reduction and making a chart of what is the asset that is claimed as reduction and on that ensuring depreciation is not again claimed. That exercise may be even easy for us, but for the department to vouch this and to find out the correct legal position, so the factual position, may be very, very difficult. May be very, very difficult. It may not even be possible to do. This is another aspect that has to be borne in mind. Now, the third aspect, you will see that there are aspects relating to loans being taken by charitable. Interestingly, there is a circular of the board itself which says that if loan is taken and if it is repaid, the repayment can be taken as application. Now, what does this mean? Now, let's look at the old procedure when depreciation was also allowed. Can one say that depreciation will also be allowed, cost of the asset will also be allowed, the loan repayment will also be allowed? The answer should be no. In fact, there is a very interesting decision of the Madras High Court in 315 ITR 237, 315 ITR 237, where the issue before the Madras High Court was in a similar situation. The Madras High Court said, when you took the loan for a specific purpose, then the asset alone can be claimed as asset. The loan repayment cannot be treated as asset. They considered circular number 100 of the board issued in 1973, circular number 100 issued in 1973, and then came to this conclusion. That if you have taken the loan for the specific purpose of acquiring an asset, you claim the asset as an application. Loan repayment cannot be claimed. On the other hand, if you have not claimed the asset as an application, that is, you have not taken the loan for acquiring an asset, the repayment of the loan can also be taken as an application based on circular number 100 of 1973. Now that leads us to another question. I said we can apply it for revenue expenditure, we can apply it for capital expenditure, we can apply it in certain circumstances by way of repayment of loan also. Can I apply it? Can I apply it by way of contribution to another charitable trust or institution? By way of contribution to another charitable trust or institution? The answer seems to be a clear yes. However, please note that the law has been amended to provide that if it is given as corpus to another trust or institution, then that will not be allowed. So if you give it as normal donation, it will be allowed as application. But if you give it as corpus donation, it will not be taken as application. In fact, similar amendments have been made in section 1023 also. I will come to some of the aspects on 1023 once I am through with these aspects relating to charitable trust. Next, and again, the most important or very interesting question is, what about the deficit of 1 year? Can it be set off against a subsequent year? Now let's assume in the current year my income is 100 rupees. Let's assume that my total application is 110 rupees. So I have applied 110 rupees. In the next year, can I say if I apply 75% it is enough? There is a decision again, this was highly debated issue, but fortunately, the Supreme Court in 303 CTR 1, I repeat, 303 CTR 1, has held that it can be treated as an application. In other words, the excess that has been applied in year 1 can be carried forward and set off for application of a second year. So if I have applied 110% in year 1, in year 2 instead of 85%, if I apply 75%, that would suffer. That would suffer. But then there has been one very far-fetched idea which has been tried to be postulated by some of the charitable. They are saying the excess should be taken as the excess over 85%. Now in the example that I gave, you applied 110%, so next year you apply 75%. According to them, what they are saying is, you apply 95%, next year you can apply 75%. Because the excess over 85, 10%, they are saying can be carried over to the next. Personally, friends, I don't agree with this view. What the Supreme Court has said is only that the surplus application of 1 year can be set off against the other year. Now, the surplus application can only be the application in excess of 100. Now, this is so far as the basics of 11.1. Now, 11.1 also permits me to carry forward the application to a different year, for which, of course, I have to file what is called a form number 10, specifying the objects for which I am, I am going to use this money. Now, form number 10 has to be filed. Of course, there is a procedure, there is a time limit to file the form 10, and the board has issued a circular number 273. Circular number 273 in 1980, 273 of 1980, where through that board circular they have explained that if there is a delay in the filing of form 10, that can also be condoned in certain circumstances. I will not dwell deep into this aspect of condonation. But then please remember that if your form 10 is filed, your benefit of accumulation, what we call accumulation, will not be. Now, the law also provides that you can accumulate only for a period of 5 years. So, if the financial year is 1920, you can accumulate for a maximum of 5 years. That is financial year 2021 onwards. Okay. Of course, you are at liberty to accumulate it for a lesser period. Please note that it should be for a specific purpose. This is very important. You cannot simply say for the objects of the trust. please state what are the objects for which you are accumulating. Please state what are the objects for which we are accumulating. Now, proceeding further here, it is also important to remember that when we are talking of Form 10 and the various aspects related to Form, we are talking about the fact that you are going to apply it for a specific purpose and you are going to inform the officer accordingly. You are going to inform the officer accordingly. Okay? Now, what is interesting here is that when you are talking of accumulating it as per Form 10, then the law requires that you must inform the assessing officer within a stipulated time, that is before filing the return of income. And when does it require you to apply? It requires you to apply before the year immediately following the year of accumulation. So technically, though you are accumulating for 5 years, it may be possible that you can apply it even in year 6. The law also permits you to apply it for a purpose other than the purpose for which it was accumulated. But then the law is very carefully worded. It says that it should not be by way of giving a contribution to another charitable. And B, for applying it for any other purpose, it is imperative that you get the prior approval of the assessing officer. Please note, very, very careful. It requires a prior approval of the assessing. When we are talking of a trust or institution, accumulating, it only talks of an intimation in Form number 10. But once you have crossed the threshold and you want to utilize it for any other purpose, whether within the 5-year period or before, after the 5-year period, you have to get the prior approval of the assessor. That is again another very interesting point that you may bear. So you may either apply the income or accumulate the income. The accumulated income will also be treated as having been applied for charity. Of course, Section 11 also permits you to apply the income in the year of receipt if it is not received in the previous year. So in other words, even if you drop your income and expenditure account on mercantile basis, your application can be on cash. Your application can be on cash. Likewise, the law also permits you to apply the income before the due date for filing the return of income, if for any reason you are not able to apply it in the previous year. Now let us assume, simple example, one of you, say the chairman comes to my trust one day and says, here, hold 1 crore. That day happens to be, say, 31st day of March. How do you expect me to apply 85 lakhs the same day? May not be possible. In order to avoid this, what they have provided for is that you can apply it before the due date for filing the return. Now, 11(1)(a) talks of a sale of a capital asset, and for all practical purposes says that an exemption will be available if you reinvest the proceeds in another capital asset. If you reinvest the proceeds in another capital asset, that will be enough under 11(1). But then there are a couple of aspects that arise here. One may notice that there is a circular issued or an instruction issued by the board in 1975. The instruction number 883. Instruction number 883 of the board issued on 24th of September 1975. Now, through this board instruction, the board instruction says that if you reinvest in a fixed deposit for a period not less than 6 months, that will also be sufficient compliance with 11(1)(a). It will be sufficient compliance with 11(1)(a) if one were to reinvest in a fixed deposit for a period exceeding. Now, the issue relating to this aspect has come up before the Calcutta High Court in 206 ITR 138. 206 ITR 138, the Calcutta High Court, where the Calcutta High Court referred to this board instruction and said, on the basis of board instruction, even investment in a fixed deposit will qualify for the benefit of 11(1)A exemption. But went on one step further. It went on one step further to say that the 6 months, etc., cannot be applied. Once you say that reinvestment in fixed deposit is reinvestment in a capital asset, that is enough. There is no need to place a 6-month embargo, and therefore they said even if it is for a period less than 6 months, the benefit of this circular will be available, and there should be no difficulty in claiming the benefit of this particular instruction of the board. We were talking about various aspects relating to the accumulation, relating to the application of income, and all of it. We were also talking about filing of a Form 10. Incidentally, the law has now made it mandatory that the Form 10B, that is the audit report, should also be uploaded. Along with the return of income within the time allowed for filing the return, failing which the assessee will not be entitled to the exemption. So, it is not enough to file the return within the time specified. It is important to also upload the Form 10B, which is the audit report within the time that is specified. Many charitable trusts and institutions are suffering from a lot of difficulty because they have failed to upload the Form 10B, not realizing the amount. The board has issued a circular. The circular or the instruction is dated 3rd January 2020. And through this instruction or circular number 2 of 2020 rather, the board has made it very clear that wherever the audit report has been prepared before the filing of the return of income under 139(4)A, before the filing of the return of income under 139(4)A, the audit report, even if filed belatedly, will not result in any disallowance of exemption to the charitable trust. They have said it is filed subsequent to the return. The delay will be condoned. Right? The delay will be condoned, provided it is filed within the date specified under 139. 139 includes 139(5), a revised return. So, if you have filed it not under 139(4)A, but under 139(5)B, the revised return is filed along with the Form 10, then the benefit of the exemption will not be lost. But this will apply only to assessment year 16, 17 and 17. For assessment year starting from 1890 and also for assessment year 16, 17 and 17, 18, where a revised return has not been filed within the time stipulated, or where the audit report has not been obtained before filing the return of income, the board has issued a circular. The board through its circular has clarified. The board through its circular has clarified that a delay of up to 365 days can be condoned by the commissioners of income, provided there is reasonable cause for the delay. Right? So, it is important that you have to examine for assessment year 18, 19 and onwards, and also for assessment year 16, 17, where the audit report is not dated before the date of filing of the return of income, or where it is not filed, the revised return is also not filed within the time stipulated, then the benefit of the exemption can only be available if the delay is condoned by the Commissioner of Income Tax, provided the delay does not exceed 365 days. One may ask me, what will happen if the delay exceeds for 365 days? The board has then the power under 119 to condone the delay. It is not as though you are left remediless. You are left remediless in this regard. You can approach the board for condonation. I'll quickly deal with certain aspects relating to the claim of exemption being lost because of violating the provisions of 13(1). Now, 13(1)(c) is a provision which provides that if the benefit is made available, if any benefit is derived directly or indirectly, if any benefit is derived directly or indirectly to the person specified in subsection 3 of section 13, that is 13(3), then the trust will not be entitled to take it. I'll come back to this last few words that I said. The trust will not be entitled. Likewise, 13(1)(d) provides that if you have invested the monies that are set apart, whether it is within that 15%, 85% application balance, or wherever you have accumulated income, that amount must be kept invested in the modes specified in 11(5). If you have kept it invested in modes which are not specified in 11(5), 13(1)(d) provides that the income from such investment will be taxable or will not be entitled to the exemption. There is, of course, I am not getting into too much of the depth on who is the person mentioned in 13(3). I will come back to that aspect. But before that, if you look at 13(1)(d), you have a decision of Supreme Court which is reported in 235 taxman, 235 taxman, 516, 235 taxman 516, where the Supreme Court has held that the benefit of the exemption will be available, and 13(1)(d) will only be applicable to bring to tax the income from the investment which is in violation of 11(5). So if I have invested 1 crore in a manner which is not specified in 11(5), the income, let's say I have invested it in a fixed deposit with a private person, an NBFC, which is not otherwise permitted by law, the interest therefrom will only be taxable. That is what the Supreme Court says in Working Women's Court. Okay. Now, with regard to 13(1)(c), there is always this difficulty as to what will be entitled or what will be disentitled from the exemption. Now, if you read section 13(1), it starts off with saying, 13(1) starts off with saying, nothing contained in section 11 and 12 shall operate so as to exclude from the total income of the previous year of the person in receipt thereof, in case of a trust for charitable or religious purposes or a charitable or religious institution, any income thereof, if such trust or institution has been created or established so and so, so and so, and the benefit inures to a person specified in 13(3). The language uses any income thereof. Now, many courts have taken a view that when they say any income thereof, it means the whole of the income, net income of the charitable trust or institution. However, there is a very interesting decision of the Bombay High Court, which is reported in 101 taxman.com 247. 101 taxman.com 247. Where the Bombay High Court says, I'm sorry, I'm getting a lot of disturbance. I think I request that participants may please mute themselves, Mr. Karthik Subhash. Unfortunately or fortunately, I can see who is unmuting yourself. Right? So I can name the person because it's coming on top. Right? So please request, because particularly it is creating a lot of disturbance.
Yes, sir. Yes. Numbers கொஞ்சம் மியூட் பண்ணுங்க. எக்ஸிட் ஆகி திரும்ப வரப்போ சவுண்ட் வருது. இருக்குது. நியூ அதே மாதிரி
problem.
disturbance வருது, please.
Okay. Exit type 3 for both words. Okay.
Please.
Anyway, now we were talking about the decisions of Bombay High Court. The Bombay High Court has held that the benefit of Section 11 will be lost as a result of 13(1)(c) only to the extent of violation. So, if a person has derived a benefit to the extent of say 100 rupees and the income of the trust is say 1000 rupees, the 900 rupees according to the Bombay High Court will be entitled to the exemption. The 100 rupees will alone be taxed. Of course, I must mention that most of the other high courts have taken a different view of the matter. On 13(1)(d) there is no problem. We have the Supreme Court, but I will have to come back to certain aspects on 13(1)(c) and 13(1)(d) once I get to the new procedure, which is being inserted by the Finance Act 20. Now, Section 13(1)(c) refers to 13(3) and says the benefit is derived directly or indirectly by persons referred to in 13(3). And 13(3) says the author of the trust, the founder of the trust, the person who has made substantial contribution to the trust, any other person who is a relative of such person, who concerns in which such person, such trust has made substantial contribution. So one may read that. I'm not getting into each and every aspect, and it talks about a relative. The term relative is also defined to mean the spouse of the individual, brother or sister of the individual. I'll not delve into much of this. But then, there seems to be one practical difficulty. One of the persons who is specified in 13(3) is a person who has made substantial contribution. A person who has made substantial contribution to the trust or institution. That is to say, any person whose total contribution up to the end of the relevant previous year exceeds 50,000 rupees. I am simply not able to fathom how somebody can keep track of this. Every year I keep giving some money to a charitable trust. I don't even know how much I am giving year after. I myself don't know whether I have crossed the 50,000 threshold. How would the trust be having such particulars? Because the law requires that the 50,000 is in the aggregate up to the end of the said previous year. It is not even with reference to a year. First of all, I would think that the 50,000 limit is archaic. It's a very small number today. It is a very small number today. It is very archaic. That itself requires to be amended to not less than 5 lakh. But be that as it may, whatever be the limit, how are we going to keep track of this? Please also remember the specified persons are relatives of such persons. So, if you give a donation of up to exceeding 50,000 up to the previous year, then if a benefit accrues to say a lineal descendant or ascendant, or a lineal ascendant or descendant of your spouse, for example, your wife's grandfather or grandmother derives the benefit, then also the provisions of 13(3) can be attracted and 13(1)(c) violation may occur. How somebody can keep track of all this is something which I would think is very, very difficult in practice. But be that as it may, I just thought I will highlight this for the benefit of all of us. Now, 115 BBC is again a fairly later provision come into act. Now, 115 BBC provides that if there is an anonymous donation, the anonymous donation should be taxed at 30%. Of course, there are some limits. It says such donations received are in excess of 5% of the total donation or exceeds rupees 1 lakh. Exceeds 5% of the total donation or rupees 1 lakh. Now, friends may ask me whether this 5% or 1 lakh is the threshold. And once you violate this, the entire amount of voluntary contribution will be taxable. The answer is no. It is not some kind of a threshold. In other words, it is some kind of a basic exemption. So, if a trust has, say, 20 lakhs of other donations, 5% thereof will be 1 lakh. If this trust has received anonymous donations of 1,30,000, say, 30,000 alone will be brought to tax under 115. Now, please also note that when a trust violates 13(1)(c) or 1(d), the income that is to be taxed will be taxed at the maximum marginal rate. The maximum marginal rate today is 40% plus surcharge, roughly amounting to 42.74%. Right? But 115BBC still talks of only 30%. It has not synced with the marginal rate. When the rate of tax, highest rate of tax was 30%, they provided for 30% in the context of 115BBC. But after they have amended the rate of tax, increasing it to up to 40% in the Finance Act, they have not made any amendment. So anonymous donations, they still get away with a 30% rate of tax and not with the maximum marginal. Also, friends, you must remember that there have been amendments to provide that the provisions of 40A3, 40A3A and 40A1A will also apply to a charitable purpose. Now, this creates again another difficulty because I will have to apply more than what I otherwise have to apply, because let us assume I have applied 85% already. And let's say the application is say 10 lakh. Out of this 10 lakh, let us say on 2 lakh, I have violated TDS provision, and it may result in a 40A1A result. So on that 3 lakh, again, it will not be treated as application. And therefore, you may have to apply again a further sum of money so as to comply with the 85% limit. Now, this is insofar broadly as various aspects relating to a charitable trust or institution. Of course, I will still be dealing with the amendments that have been made by the Finance Act 2020, particularly by way of procedure. But before I go there, there are a couple of aspects in relation to 1023 which I would like to touch upon. Now, if you see 1023C, largely we are talking of medical institutions and educational institutions. I am not talking of government-funded institutions, non-funded institutions. Now, there are two aspects which create a distinction between 1023C and the others. Now, in 1023C, let us say, for example, for an education institute, there are two categories. One, where the gross receipt does not exceed the prescribed amount, and the prescribed amount is rupees 1 crore. The gross receipt does not exceed rupees 1 crore. And two is where the gross receipt exceeds 1. Likewise for medical institutes also. Now, what is this 1 crore? How is it to be looked at? Because the law provides in 1023 that the 1 crore is with regard to, if I can take the liberty of reading the exact language, that might be even better. If you see section 1023C, in fact, 1023C is one of the most complex sections. I don't know why the provisions have been made so complex in relation to charitable and religious. If you see an university or educational institution existing solely for educational purposes and not for the purpose of profit, if the aggregate annual receipts of such university or educational institution do not exceed an amount of annual receipts as prescribed amount is 1 crore. So it talks about annual receipts of such university or education. So within one charitable trust, if I have more than one educational institute, I run 3 colleges under one trust. I also run a couple of schools. Then the 1 crore limit is to be applied with reference to each institution and not with reference to the trust. For this purpose, you may look at the decision of the Jammu and Haryana High Court, Jammu and Kashmir High Court, Jammu and Kashmir High Court, which is reported in Tax Management India, and also the Karnataka High Court decision in 358 ITR 373, 358 ITR 373. Right? So this is one other aspect. The other very interesting aspect with regard to 1023C, in comparison to a regular charitable or religious trust claiming exemption under Section 7, not under 10, is something like this. Now, if you look at Section 2 within bracket 24, it provides that voluntary contributions are also income of a trust or institution. Voluntary contributions are also income of a trust or institution. A. B. Having said so, the next aspect to bear in mind is that Section 12, which is only with regard to a charitable trust or institution falling under Section 7, Section 12 specifically provides that voluntary contributions which are with a specific direction that they are towards the corpus of the trust, voluntary contributions with a specific direction that they are towards the corpus of the trust will not be treated as income of the trust. So basically, if I receive 100 rupees towards corpus of my trust, that 100 rupees will not come to the income and expenditure account. It is a balance sheet item. I must put it in the accountant's terms. So I don't have to apply it for charitable or religious purposes within the year. I can apply it for the purpose for which it is stated at a later point in time. Now, rightly or wrongly, Section 1023C does not have a corresponding provision like Section 12 to say that corpus donations will not be treated as income. So, does that mean that corpus donations will also be treated as income? If it is, please remember, within the previous year or within the time stipulated in Section 11(1), you will have to apply it for charitable or religious purposes. Right? You will have to apply it for charitable or religious purposes. This is again a problem. But I can provide one solution. There are decisions of various benches of the tribunal, the Mumbai Tribunal, the Pune Tribunal, and all of it. Of course, most of them remaining unreported. I will only talk of the reported ones. 172 ITD 78, 172 ITD 78, 169 ITD 271, 169 ITD 271, and 50R ITR TRIP 355. 55 ITR 50 ITR TRIP 355. Now, in all of these decisions, the issue before the tribunal was a trust is not registered under 12A, and therefore is not entitled to the benefit of the exemption at all. What will happen to the corpus? What will happen to the corpus? Should it be treated as income or should not be treated as income? The tribunals, all the benches have consistently held that it should not be treated as income. So, basically what the bench is recognizing is that even without the operation of Section 12, a receipt in the nature of a corpus donation cannot become income. Now, applying the same analogy to 1023C, one can definitely urge that voluntary contributions, which are with a specific direction that they are towards the corpus, should not be treated as income. I have a question. How can donation for a specific state is not forming part of the income itself? If it is with a specific for a specific purpose, then one can definitely say it is not the income of the trust, and therefore the application condition will not apply. 85% application condition will not apply. But at the same time, you must remember that you must keep these funds also invested in the mode specified in 11.5 only, Otherwise, you will be liable for the effect of 13(1)(d). Of course, on 13(1)(d), I have promised to come back to one other issue, which can be an even more dangerous point than what anybody could have done. That is by virtue of the amendment made by the Finance Act 2020. Now, talking about the amendment, there have been a series of amendments in relation to the procedure to be followed. I will first quickly deal with one aspect, which is an amendment made in section 11(7). Right? I will deal with 11(7) and then go on to deal with the various other aspects. Now, 11(7) provides for something like this. It provides that if a particular trust has been registered under 12A, 12AA, or 12AB, then it will be ineffective if 1023C approval is granted on or after on any date or from 1/6/2020, whichever is earlier. So the 12AB will become ineffective. Now the law also in 11(7) provides like this. If you apply for a 12AB when you are having a 1023C, the minute 12AB is granted, 1023C will go. Now honestly, this all arose from various issues that arose because many of these educational institutions had 1023C registration also, 12AB, 12A registration also. And they were choosing 1023C or 12A, whichever is more better for them. So to get rid of this, they are saying, if you have a 12AB and a 1023C, even at the beginning of 1/6/2020, your 1023C will be applicable. If you apply for a 12AB thereafter, your 12AB will applicable, 1023C will become inoperable. So you don't have the option of choosing because one of them will automatically become inoperable. This is the amendment made in 11(7). Now I will quickly take you through the various aspects relating to the timelines for the purpose of granting the approval under 1023C and section 11. Now please note, friends, that the timelines I am stating are uniform for both 1023C and 11 exemption. That is, whether you want an approval under 1023C or you want a registration under 12A. Now, first of all, what they are seeking to do is doing away with 12A and 12A approval. All approvals will not only hitherto be granted under 12A, but even existing institutions or trusts which have registered under 12A or 12AA will now have to make an application for 12AB. If you will recall, earlier we were talking about registration under 12A, and when they inserted 12AA, that was only prospective for new trusts that were formed. Now it is not like that. Even if you are a 12A trust or you are a 12AA trust registered under these trusts, you will have to now make a fresh application at 12AB. Now I will take you item by item in respect of different kinds of registrations or approvals that they are talking about. Now for a trust which is already registered under 12A, 12AA or 1023C, already registered under 12A, 12AA or 1023C, you must make an application before 31/12/2020 under 12AB. Of course, this was originally to be September 2020. Now they have extended the day up to December 2020 because of the pandemic. So you have to make an application under 12AB before 31/12/2020 and within 3 years. And within 3 months. From the end of the month in which the application is received, the approval under 12AB or under 1023C will be granted. And this registration or approval will be valid for 5 years. 5 years from when? 5 years from the first day of the previous year in which you made the application. 5 years from the first day of the previous year in which you made the application. Now, This is with regard to an existing trust which is already registered. Next, what happens in case of a trust which is not enjoying a registration as on date? Then they provide that at least 1 month prior to commencement of the previous year. I will take the issue separately. First, let me take the date. At least 1 month prior to commencement of the previous year, relevant to the assessment year for which the registration is sought, an application should be made for registration under 12AB. And within 1 month from the end of that month, the commissioner should pass an order of provisional registration. The provisional registration, please note, is valid for a maximum period of 3 years. It is valid for a maximum period of 3 years. I'll come back to this. So, if you are a trust already registered, you make an application within 31/12/2020, and you will get within 3 months from the end of this month a registration under 12AB. If you are a trust which is not registered under 12A or 12AA, etc., then you make an application at least 1 month prior to the commencement of the previous year, relevant to the assessment year in which you claim the debt. So if you want the benefit from, say, assessment year 22-23, that is 2021 previous year, you must make the application before 28th February 2021. Right? Then you are entitled to the benefit of getting a provisional registration, which is valid for a maximum period of 3 years. Now again note, if you have been provisionally registered, the law doesn't stop here. It says within 6 months prior to the expiry of the provisional registration. Within 6 months prior to the expiry of the provisional registration. Or within 6 months from the commencement of the activities of the trust or institution. The trust or institution must make an application for registration under 12AB, which will be a regular registration. I am not calling it permanent because hereafter there is nothing called permanent. Maximum is 5 years. So, if you have got a provisional registration within 6 months prior to its expiry, or within 6 months from the date of commencement, whichever is earlier, you must approach the commissioner again for a regular registration. And the commissioner may grant you a regular registration for 5 years. Now, once you have been regularly registered, please remember every 5 years you have to renew your registration. Now, how is that done? That is done by making an application within 6 months prior to the expiry of the registration. And within 6 months from the end of that month, a registration will be granted, which will again be valid only for a period of 5 years. Likewise, trusts or institutions which have been hit by 11/7, which I explained a little earlier, must make an application within 6 months prior to commencement of the assessment year for which the registration is sought. So, if you want to make an application for approval from 22-23, you must make the application before 30th of September. And you will get the registration for 5 years. You also have a provision which provides that if you want to adopt or modify your object, then within 30 days from the date of the adoption or modification, you have to approach the commissioner again for 12AB registration. Within 30 days of the modification or adoption of the object, you have to come back to the Commissioner of Income Tax for registration. And within 6 months from the end of the month in which the application is received, the commissioner will grant the exemption, will grant the registration, which again will be valid for a period of 5 years. Now, please note, 2 things happen automatically in this. One, a trust already registered under 12A, 12AA or 1023, which is now coming before 31st December 2020 and which will get registered for 5 years, this will be an automatic process. I'll explain what I'm saying. Likewise, provisional registration will be an automatic. Now, before I get further, let me talk of some of the issues here itself. So first thing is, if I am an already registered trust, nobody can look into genuineness, etc. First 5 years, I will get it. But after the first 5 years, again, he will look into registration. He will look into whether you are eligible because you are, what are your objects, whether they are charitable, etc. Which I will explain as I proceed. Likewise, when you go for a provisional registration, there is no investigation that can be done. The commissioner, in my view, has to grant you the registration once he is satisfied that you are a charitable. That's all. Whether your objects are genuine, anything can't be. So to that extent, you may notice that. To that extent, you may notice that. To that extent, you may notice.
Kumar sir, mute பண்ணுங்க sir.
To that extent, one may notice that there is a possibility that a trust can, without even being investigated into, get registration, but that may be valid only for 1 year effectively, because if you see a provisional registered trust, the registration is valid for a maximum period of 3 years, but once you commence your activities within 6 months, you have to apply for a regular registration. So let us say I commence the trust sometime in say December of 2020. I will get a provisional registration if I apply within one month from before the end of the financial year. Right? That is before 28th of February. If I apply, then I can get the benefit of provisional registration. Now, supposing I commence my activities in December itself, I can up to June not apply for a regular registration. In June, I will apply for regular registration. That will be valid from 1st April. But on the basis of my provisional registration, for the first 3 months, I am entitled to the exemption. So that can be a trick, because there somebody can get away without any investigation. Likewise, in provisional registration, there seems to be one more problem. It says that the application for provisional registration should be made at least 1 month prior to commencement of the previous year, relevant to the assessment year for which the registration is sought. So if I want the registration from the assessment year 21-22, I want the benefit of the exemption from 21-22, then I must apply before 28th of February 2021. Now, what if I form a trust or institution in March 20? The law doesn't seem to have an answer to this at all. The law doesn't seem to have an answer to this at all. In such circumstances, what would happen? So these are just some basic issues that arise. Before I proceed, I will also take some other issues that arise as we go further. Please note that the benefit of the exemption will be available from the first day of the previous year in which you made the application. But if you are an already registered trust under 12A or 12AA, you will continue to enjoy the exemption, even though this has not been looked at. Now, there are problems. What happens if the commissioner does not grant the registration within the time stipulated by law? What if the commissioner does not grant me the registration within the time stipulated by law? This is a question which has been begging for an answer in many circumstances in the context of 12AA, where the registration was supposed to be granted within 6 months. Now, interestingly, we had a decision of the Supreme Court reported in Society for Promotion of Education, 382 ITR 6. 382 ITR 6. ITR 6, where the Supreme Court has held that if registration for a trust is not granted within the stipulated time by law, then the registration is deemed to have been granted. The registration is deemed to have been granted. This is another decision which is in favor of assessee, so to that extent, so far so good. I have a couple of queries. I will take one of them now and one of them later. Is there any timeline extension for a trust registered in January 2020, but due to pandemic not able to apply for registration till date? Now, basically, they have talked about an extension for existing trust. They have talked about registration for an existing trust being extended up to 31/12/2020. But for a trust which has been formed, they have provided very clearly that if an application is pending, that application will be now deemed to be pending under 12A. Unfortunately, they have not provided for what will happen to a trust or institution which is created in January 2020 only. So the answer to this question seems to be very tricky. We don't have proper answers. We may have to litigate this, fight it out, but I would suggest that you make an application at the earliest possible. And if need be, apply for a condonation with the board, with the board being competent to condone any delay. It may be appropriate to move a condonation petition to the board also. Now, incidentally, when we are talking about trusts or institutions, there are other difficulties that can also be faced. Like, for example, I apply for a registration, right? But the commissioner wants me to amend the object. Now, the law provides that within 30 days I have to approach the commissioner again from the date of amendment of the object. Should I make one more application? To my mind, the answer is no. The original application can itself be acted upon, but the law does not provide for it. Likewise, what happens if I miss any of these timelines? Of course, subject to the condonation by the board, it appears that the trust or institution will be denied the benefit of exemption. Of course, that trust or institution, supposing I am an existing trust, let us assume by 31/12/2020 I have to approach the Commissioner of Income Tax for a regular registration. Supposing I miss two, then I will not be entitled to exemption. But at the same time, please note that you will end up with a scenario where, though you are otherwise entitled to the benefit, you may lose the benefit because you did not come within the stipulated time. Now, this creates another difficulty. But then, the only saving grace is this exemption is not lost in eternity. It is lost only for that 1 year. You can always make a fresh application for registration, but then please remember that only provisional registration will be granted, and you have to again apply for a permanent registration immediately thereafter. And only then can the benefit of the exemption be granted for even the next year. Of course, I have one more question, which says I have filed an application under 12A well before the introduction of the new system. Will I have to make a fresh application? I think the answer to this is somewhere in the Act. I will come back on this question. I would think that a fresh application may have to be made because this is a different registration at 12AB. The forms are yet to come and we'll have to apply in the prescribed form for 12AB. That may be a thing, but I think a fresh application will have to be made. Now, going further, there are other conditions. Now, if you see, as I said, for the provisional registration or for the registration which is granted when you are already registered, no inquiry can be made. But in all other cases, they can make an inquiry. What is the inquiry they can make? They can make inquiry on three fronts. One, with regard to the objects of the trust or institute. Two, with regard to the genuineness of the activities of the trust or institute. And three, compliance by the trust of requirements of any other law as are material for the attainment of its object. I repeat, objects of the trust or institution. Objects of the trust or institution. Genuineness of the activities of the trust or institution. Compliance by the trust or institution of such requirements as of any other law as are material for achievement of the object. Now, earlier they only talked about genuineness of the trust, of the activities of the trust, not even of the trust. Now they are adding objects of the trust and compliance with requirements of any other law. Now, this seems to be to my mind, a very badly thought out provision. A very badly thought out provision. Because one very important thing is, of course, I don't mind a commissioner looking into the objects of my trust. But if one has to look into whether I have satisfied the requirements of any other law before granting me registration, then you are giving the commissioner the power. You are giving the commissioner the power to look into aspects which are not at all concerning him. Now, for example, let us say you are an assessing officer, you are a commissioner. How do you decide whether I have violated the FCRA, the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act? How do you see whether I have violated some other act? You are not a commissioner under that law. You are a commissioner under the income tax law. Logically, I would think violation of other laws should be dealt with independently, and that power should not be granted to the commissioner. But unfortunately, that is not how the law is. Unfortunately, that is not how the law is drafted. The law is drafted in such a manner that the commissioner can inquire into compliance with the requirements of any other law also, which are material for the attainment of the object. Now, we don't know what he is going to say as material for the achievement of his object. In fact, as I am speaking, there is already a query. Can we say that a minor breach of income tax law, can we still argue that renewal cannot be denied? I will deal with this aspect, my dear friend, but that is for cancellation of registration. If you are already registered, then that is for cancellation of registration. Please remember that if you are registered trust and if you are going to be renewed under the provisions, there is no investigation that will happen. You will automatically be granted renewal. That's my understanding. For a trust which is already registered under 12A, 12AA or 1023C, which is now seeking a fresh 12AB, you can automatically get the benefit of the registration by making an application with the stipulated time. Now, the law provides that orders should be in writing, etc. That is not much of a problem. I will deal with the aspect relating to cancellation. Deal with the aspect relating to cancellation. I'll take some couple of questions in the meeting. 12A has been filed, but still department has not processed the same, whether we can cover under 12BAB as two trust or existing trust. If department process, then give order. No. Yes, you can get a 12AB. You can apply under 12AB and get it. Remember that there is some case law, objects need to be only during functioning of the trust and not while granting registration. Is this right? Of course, this is right, Mr. Ramanathan, that objects should be looked into for the purpose of granting exemption or otherwise. For the purpose of registration, what is to be looked into is only genuineness, is what courts have held time and again. That is exactly why they are seeking to amend the law to provide that objects can be looked into. So the amended law by the Finance Act 2020, objects can also be looked into, and not only the objects of the trust, whether they have violated the provisions of any other law can also be looked into. I'll quickly deal with cancellation of registration. Again, it says cancellation can be done when the trust or institution is not genuine, or when it is not carried out in accordance with the object, or where the trust loses the exemption by virtue of section 11 read with section 12, either in whole or in part, because of violation of section 13(1). And lastly, if it is noticed that an order, direction or decree holding non-compliance with any other law has been passed and has attained finality. So, you are not a genuine trust, you are not carrying on yourself with in accordance with the object, registration can be cancelled. Please remember, provisional registration cannot be cancelled, right? But a regular registration can be. A regular registration can. Provisional cannot be cancelled. Next, it says two other things. You are not entitled to the exemption by virtue of section 13(1). Right? You are not entitled to the exemption by virtue of section 13(1). And two, there is an order, direction or decree of non-compliance with any other law which has reached finality. Now, this is very dangerous. If I am not entitled to the benefit of exemption because of violation of 13(1), in my view, that income should be taxed. Next year, I may not violate 13(1). I might be entitled for the exemption. On a year, registration does not entitle me to exemption. Registration is only one step. So if I violated 13(1), I am not going to get the exemption. Department has nothing to lose. Why should they cancel my registration? If they cancel, then the whole process starts again. So long as I am violating 13(1), I will not be entitled to exemption. The minute I don't violate, I will be entitled to the exemption. That's how the law should be made. But unfortunately, they are trying to probably circumvent the Supreme Court. Where, because they have now talked of 13(1), not merely 13(1)(c) or 1(d). So even if you violate 13(1)(d), that is, don't invest in the manner specified, manner specified in section 11(5), they probably may not be entitled to the exemption at all, because I can cancel your registration. Now here, cancellation, also note, they are saying where an order, direction or decree has been passed, holding non-compliance with any other law, and such order, direction or decree has attained finality. So this is a very dangerous one. But then you will notice that this is relatively better than granting registration. For granting registration, in the opinion of the commissioner, you have not complied with the law. But for cancellation, he needs an order or a decree which has been issued under some other law, which has not been challenged and which has reached finality. So this is so far as cancellation of registration. I'll quickly go on to section 115 TD and stop here for some time so that we can take some questions. Now, as far as 115 TD is concerned, it talks of tax on accreted income. Tax on accreted income. So, if a trust converts itself into a form which is not eligible for registration under 12AA or 12AD, or merges with an entity which is not a trust or institution with similar object, having registration at 12A or 12AA or 12AD, or dissolves and does not transfer the assets to another trust, then there will be a tax on accreted income. That is, on the market value of the asset, income will be taxable at the marginal rate of 40% plus surcharge. Now, please note that the law in subsection 3 of section 115 TD reads like this. For the purpose of subsection 1, I am reading because it is very, very important. For the purpose of subsection 1, a trust or institution shall be deemed to have converted into any form not eligible for registration under 12AA or 12AB. If in a previous year, the registration granted to it under 12AA or AB is cancelled, 2, it has adopted or undertaken modification of objects which do not conform to the conditions of registration, and has not applied for fresh registration at 12AA or 12AB, has filed application for fresh registration, but the application is rejected. So, now this is very, very dangerous. If you don't apply for 12AA or 12AB, it simply means that that unaccredited income will be taxable. So let us assume a 12AA trust fails to move an application before 31/12/2020 for registration under 12AB. There is a possibility that the department can invoke 115 DD and say that the market value of the trust, you have to read it along with Rule 17 CB. Along with Rule 17 CB, provides the market value of the trust can virtually get taxed at 42% or whatever it is, 42.74% along with surcharge. Now, friends, I will probably stop here. I have a few questions to take. In fact, one question has come more than one. Form 9A filed along with ITR, trust gross receipts ₹100, includes accrued ₹10, but spent ₹95, which is more than 85%. Is it required to file Form 9A? If it is filed, is it restricted to 85%? Excess 10 is disallowed under 143(1). No disallowance can be made under 143(1) in the present circumstances. ₹100 is the gross receipt. You have already applied ₹95. There can be no case for disallowance in the normal court. But then in so far as Form 9A is concerned, just give me a moment. Form 9A deals with application for exercise of option under 11(1). That is applicable only when I am not able to apply 85%. In a case where I am applying 85%, I don't have to file Form 9A at all. Therefore, the 143(1) in my understanding is bad in law. It is bad in law and no adjustment can be made under 143(1). It will make a good case for both 154 and an appeal. Next, can I consciously choose to hold shares of some company as per wish of the donor and willing to pay tax thereon? Can I continue to hold the shares and derive it? Sir, so long as we were under the old regime, prior to the amendment made by the Finance Act 2020, there would have been no problem. You would have only had to pay tax on the income. And even that dividend income, until last year, you would have probably enjoyed an exemption. There would have been no problem at all. But by virtue of the amendment made by the Finance Act 2020, where in 12AB, they provide for cancellation of registration in certain cases under subsection 5. One of the conditions is that you are not entitled by virtue of violation of 13(1). And please remember that includes 13(1)D. And since it includes 13(1)D, you may not be entitled to the benefit of registration at all. Registration is likely to be cancelled, in which case you will probably lose the complete exemption. So I am afraid I will have to say that with the amendment you may have a problem. There is one more question. Between 1023C and Section 11, which one is better? Please highlight the consideration, Rule 1B. Now, if you had asked me this question in 2018 or 2019, I would have given a different answer. But then with so many amendments made, I think 1023C has been virtually brought on par. With Section 11 itself. So there may be today very little difference between 1023C and 11. But please note that in so far as 1023C is concerned, you may still have a difficulty with regard to corpus donation because that is not expressly provided to be a capital estate. It is still arguable and winnable, but you may have to argue it. Whereas in relation to a regular 12AB trust, it is specifically provided for in section 12 and there will be no. Incidentally, for the purpose of section 11, to accumulate income, you need to pass a resolution of the trust. Whereas, and file the form 10, etc. But there is no need for a separate form for accumulation for 1023. That is just a procedural difference, which probably will also get amended in the next. Save that there is no big difference between these. Next. Can I offer to show a business income? Of course, 13.4 specifically 11.4 specifically provides that a trust can have business income. The only requirement, it should be used for the activities of the trust, the income from the business. And two, you must maintain separate books of accounts therefore. But also remember that if you are any other activity of general public utility, you may have a problem. But if you are in education, relief to the poor, medical relief, or yoga, you will have no problem. You will have no problem. You can carry on a business activity. In fact, if you see, the Patanjali is still enjoying the benefit of section 7. Isha, where there is huge income from sale of medicines, various things, which are all Ayurvedic preparations, are also enjoying the benefit. So you may be entitled to the benefit. There is no problem.
Sir, can I intervene? I'm sorry. Sir, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Yes,
sir, I'm asking a question in the context of a religious trust. So one of the donor has granted the shares of a particular company and he wants that the income to be applied for this religious purposes. So in that case, whether this the same analogy will hold?
Sir, I have already answered that question. The Finance Act 2020 has amended the provisions say that your trust is liable to have its registration cancelled. If you violate, if you have income which is chargeable because of violation of 13(1), please remember if you hold the share, it is violation of 13(1)(d). And you will therefore be eligible only for an exemption which is not the income from that investment. You may say somebody gave it to me, but still I don't think the law makes any distinction. You may be liable for your registration getting cancelled. Does that answer your question, Chandrasekhar?
Yes.
Yes. In the current amendment made by the Finance Act, can we interchange exemptions in both 1023C and 12A? No, the answer is a clear no. You have to choose. 1023C means 1023C a registration. Right? Or recognition. If you want to go under section 11, 12AB, you can't choose either of the two. That was permitted before the amendment. Post amendment, that is not permitted. According to 113(9) inserted by Finance Act 2015, a trust needs to file Form 10 or IT return within due date for claiming 11. For assessment year 17-18, trust has filed Form 10 and audit report within due date, but not filed IT return within due date due to unavoidable circumstances, which is beyond the assessor's control. AO held Form 10 accumulation is income. Can we find condonation of delay for the above? Is there any remedy for the trust to claim accumulated income? The only remedy, if you can think of, is by approaching the board under 119(2)(b). By approaching the board under 119(2). There is no circular or instruction whereby the powers have been delegated to anybody to condone delays. Because here the delay is not in Form 10. If the delay is in Form 10, then you could approach the commissioner. Because the board has delegated the power by circular number 2 of 2020. But if the delay is in filing return, then you may have to approach the board. Sir, can teaching yoga by unit under Vedaki Maharishi be treated as education or medical and can claim 1023 is C3AD if its gross receipt is less than rupees 1 crore. In my understanding, there were decisions of various benches of the tribunal. I am not able to recollect the decision right away, but there are decisions of benches of the tribunal where the tribunal had held that yoga is also medical relief. Right? So based on that, one may make an attempt, but then now you will understand that by virtue of the insertion in section 215 in charitable purpose of the word yoga, you can claim it under that itself, but then you must be registered. Now what you are trying to see is you don't want to get registered. But then I would, if I were you, I will get myself registered under 12AB and claim the exemption. Another question that has come is how to apply to the board. There is no specific format. You have to make a general application on a plain paper. If you so wish, you can send me your mail ID and I will probably send you a draft, a petition that has been made, though not in respect of charitable trust. Various other 119 petitions which have been made, I can have copies sent to you. I am sharing with all of you my mail ID. I know most of you already know me and know my mail ID, but I'm still sharing the mail ID. You can always contact me for any requirement. I think that is, so far as all the questions are concerned, I think I've answered almost everything. I will probably leave it back to the organizers. The chairman may take over. But before I do, before I do,
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Before I do, sir, I have to thank the organizers for this opportunity because honestly, I started preparing yesterday and I realized how many issues were there and for which we had no answer. So thank you, sir, for giving me this opportunity to learn. And of course, I definitely need to thank the participants for the patience in hearing and also raising questions, which again is a learning. That is the charm of speaking itself. Thank you all very much. Thank you.